Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for what is now our fifth educational series. We last week had the pleasure of having our first guest, Sarah Schwab from the Content Creation Coach, and because that went so well, we decided that moving forward, we were going to start bringing new guests to our little panel here. So my name is Jared Heckbert. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing here at Brilliance. I've been at Brilliance now for a little over 4 years. So today I have the pleasure of bringing Mr. Dave McDonald. I'm going to go ahead and let him introduce himself.
Hi there. Good day, everybody. I've always been into software development ever since I was 10 years old, Jared, and so I'm excited to get on today and talk about more software development and integration and things like that. So I went to Purdue University in aerospace engineering, and I worked for NASA and in the payload operations group as a flight controller, and that was so much fun. And once I got out of NASA, I was like, hey, what could I be working on to kind of get some hands-on experience in the world? And so I actually started working for Rockwell Automation, and I was a engineer for them on the front lines as I was writing software and UI interfaces for manufacturing systems. I eventually helped start Brilliance and with Lori, my wife, and I went on while I was at Rockwell, I went on to manage a very large data warehouse having to do with millions and millions of rows of data. And after about 15 years, I decided to jump in and join Brilliance, and so it's been great ever since. It's been about 10 years I've been here. So
yes, absolutely. It's been a lot of fun, and I've had the pleasure of watching our excellent operations team deliver on so many fun data integration projects, and we're gonna discuss data integrations and specifically working with ERPs here today. So in my time at Brilliance, I've learned that as similar as a prospect may seem, there's always something different. Are there different approaches to data integrations? And if so, how do you know which one is the right fit?
Oh, absolutely. One thing that I've learned over years and years of doing this is that not one size fits all when it comes to integrations. There's so many different ways to do integrations. And in our specialty of e-commerce, one of the things that I'm always asking is like, what do you want in that integration? What are you looking for? You have to think about the different types. So products and variants, languages, images and media resources like different assets coming in, like SDS sheets and other type of information that is graphical or PDF wise to be able to show your customers. Your configured versus stock products, you're going to have to handle that integration differently for that. Accounts, users, orders, shipments, shipment tracking, invoices, invoice payments, all those different kinds of things are different types of data that you need to bring in. And so your integration is going to really depend on what kind of data you want and what other things like the age of your ERP system, your enterprise resource planning system that you're integrating to. You also need to take into consideration things like your internal and external resource skill sets, whether the people that are inside your team, if they have certain skills and certain things that they either want to expand on or you want to keep it within their core competency. You also have to consider real-time versus batch capabilities of your ERP. Sometimes ERPs really can't handle being able to do real-time capabilities. It just kind of depends on the age of your system and how things are working from that side. Also, your data quality and the inputs to the system. Is your data clean? Is it not clean? Do you need to clean it up on coming in? On security concerns, performance of different parties within the transaction, so how fast do those work? Other considerations I also have to take into account is your software as a service or on-premise. Are you working in the cloud, not working in the cloud? So there's a lot of different parts that will change the approaches on how you're going to integrate with the ERP.
In many situations, we've had companies approach us and say, we're in the middle of, we're going to do both a commerce and an ERP upgrade. at the same time. Is that something that you recommend, or do you have recommendations of around that idea?
Well, I mean, ideally, you wouldn't doing them at the same time. I always want to limit the number of items that are changing all at the same time. So usually, if you're doing an ERP implementation, you have you're maybe changing your data master, your product data master. You might be changing your customer data master. There's all kinds of things that are kind of in flux. So ideally, no, you're not doing them at the same time. However, there is the realistic considerations of you're trying to get your return on investment as soon as possible. Sometimes the nice to haves of, hey, let's do one at a time, it may take you, a year, 2 years to get that ERP done. And so therefore you need to get some ROI faster, and you need to be able to get some new marketing systems in place. You need to be able to take advantage of some of the new technologies coming out. And so at that point, then, yeah, you can do them at the same time. It's just, it takes a little bit more planning, a little bit more coordination, and it's just really having that coordination between your ERP vendor and where you are, where you're going, when you're going to be there, and kind of trying to plan out that whole process. Maybe separate them a little bit, kind of have that data in a place in the middle, so that therefore, as you're making changes on your ERP versus your e-commerce system, that if you've got that data in the middle, you can kind of change that, dump it in, make your ERP changes, and then eventually kind of reconnect it. It's all part of the considerations when you're trying to figure out how to do an implementation.
What are some common methods for the handling of the integrations?
Sure. I like to kind of break it into 3 major categories. You can either do it through an ETL type of situation, which stands for extract, transform, and load. And that means you are kind of typically in a batch situation, not always, but typically in a batch situation. You're moving data from one place to another. You're extracting the data, you're transforming it, and then you're kind of trying to load it into your own system. I actually will put doing a custom program around using an FTP client. A lot of times just good old FTP actually ends up being a really good way to do integrations, especially in the situation like you brought up a second ago, Jared, where you've got ERPs that are changing. Maybe doing an FTP in the middle of that is actually not a bad idea. But I would put FTP kind of under that ETL umbrella, in terms of it makes it so that you're kind of handling this in a batch process. And there's a lot of ETL tools on the market that are really great. I like them from an ETL standpoint. I like them because they might have pre-built integrations to certain ERPs or certain database systems kind of already in place. They don't take a lot of programming. You don't have to have high level expensive programmers that are working on ETL tools. Typically, you can kind of be more of an analyst type of function that's doing that. Programmers don't like ETL tools though, because of the fact that because you're doing a lot of configuration of the files and not necessarily doing programming. Because it's in that kind of configuration mode, it's sometimes harder to troubleshoot, harder to figure out what's going on. A programmer likes to be able to look at it and say, oh, that's where the issue is. And so ETL tools kind of obscure that a little bit. And so that's one of the downsides of ETL tool. They might be able to be more quickly implemented, and don't need a programmer, but sometimes they can be a little harder to troubleshoot. The next major category of ways that I would do integrations is with a bus. Buses have become, more and more popular as time goes on. There's kind of a couple different ways to handle a bus, and you can do it in a publish subscription type of mode, where you have systems that put messages out onto the bus and say, hey, if anybody cares, here's the new account that I just created. And they throw it out on the bus, and it just kind of constantly puts it out on the bus. You usually then have some type of bus management software that then handles the subscriptions, and it says, hey, I've got registrations from these 3 different systems that are interested in subscribing to that account topic. And so they then basically the bus management software will then take the published account message and throw it out onto the 3 other queues and say, okay, systems, when you are ready, you come pick up those account messages and import them into your system. So this actually ends up being great in an enterprise situation where you can throw lots of messages out on a bus. It's usually super quick, and you don't have to have real-time connections, happening all the time. You could have a system kind of be able to check in and pull the messages off as they need them. It's not a real-time, like as the user clicks on this, something happens. That's the one thing you got to consider when you're doing a bus, is that you got to think there could be lag anywhere in the system when you're sending these messages out. So it has to be kind of designed into the system. If you're trying to make a React screen or something, do something for the user as the user is working in a user interface and doing something on the user interface, you don't want that to go through a bus. So that's not the right technology for that, but a bus is a good way to move lots of messages around to possibly lots of different systems. They can have, in terms of programming versus config, a bus can be kind of in between. Sometimes they've got pre-built integrations and they're they're super quick and super easy. But a lot of times when you're trying to do a custom implementation to a custom system that doesn't have that pre-built integration, you're going to need to get a developer involved and go do that. The other thing is that you can also take into consideration buses when you are working on cloud systems. If you're doing a SaaS implementation where software as a service is sitting out in the cloud, an Azure bus or an Amazon bus would be a good solution to be able to throw messages and throw information out on there and let your ERP kind of come and check in and pull it off that bus as it needs. And you can kind of do a point-to-point type of bus solution where you kind of just stick it into the queue, and that that other system comes and checks the queue, and it's kind of just as kind of a holding in between. It's just a queuing system that just holds those messages in between. That's another possibility on how to use a bus. The last major category that I have that's super popular these days is an API. It stands for Application Programming Interface. And this is the programmer's favorite to go use because it really gives them the most flexibility to do whatever they want with the messages. Some systems like BigCommerce and Episerver, some of the ones that we work with, they have API interfaces kind of already built in. Sometimes they don't have everything you need, and so if you have the capability, you can oftentimes build your own API interface into the system and be able to call that. But basically, what it is that it's sitting there waiting for someone to kind of either push data into it or pull data out of it, but and it's through a programming method. And so so this is really great when you are trying to have a user that's doing something on the screen and it needs to go call another system, like right then. It needs to go check an ERP. It needs to go check if there's credit availability for them to make this purchase. Do they have enough credit? That's something that you might want to have an API set up, and so your ERP would say, yeah, their credit's good, or no, it's not good. Don't let them actually check out. So those are kind of the three major categories of stuff in terms of integrations, but yeah, there's a lot to them, and thinking about all those considerations we just talked about and which ones of these are the best ways to do it.
Everyone, even on the technical side, loves a good story. Can you share what was one of your most interesting data integrations that you've supported?
Sure. So one of the ones the story I like to talk about is we had a furniture distributor that had a legacy AS400 system, and it was linked to Episerver, and they needed basically kind of a custom PIM that would support configured SKUs. And so there was a lot of integration points on this particular system. They had more than 40 different manufacturers, thousands of standard manufacturer SKUs, but then they had millions of configured SKUs, because if you think in terms of all the different types of furniture and different types of ways that, whether it's a cabinet with handles, or whether it's different fabrics or different colors or different whatever, there's all those ends up being so many different SKUs and different configured SKUs. Well, the problem they were trying to solve was that they wanted to be able to have some type of consistency on their skewing systems. And so they kind of invented their own way of handling SKUs. And so but that ended up being, very, very custom in that they would use a particular type of product would have a particular configured SKU, and the first part it would mean this, and the second part it would mean that, and the third part it would mean that. The nice thing is that it enabled them to be able to kind of jump across manufacturers and have some kind of standard way of doing things. But in their system, in their AS400, these SKUs weren't actually even in there. They might be in there if somebody actually ordered it, but in terms of actually trying to put it out on the website and show that, they didn't actually exist until the customer actually wanted it. So it ended up being, a lot of complex pieces. There were batch files and APIs, custom code, and FTPs. So it was kind of across a lot of different places in terms of technologies, but it was a lot of fun. One other system that I worked on that was also interesting was we had a system where it was a corporate customer that acquired many different divisions, and so they didn't have one single ERP. So they actually ended up having the same product might come from 2 different ERPs that are in 2 different divisions, and they might have 2 different SKUs. They also might have the same exact customer that in one system had one account number and another system had a different account number. Also had the same order, that as a customer's checking out, that same order might need to be fulfilled by 2, 3, 4 different ERPs. So breaking that out into and handling the fulfillment across multiple ERPs with different SKU numbers and different account numbers certainly made it a lot more interesting.
Very interesting. How did you route the right order to the right ERP?
That was kind of fun, and we basically had to put together a bus system that ended up having rules that would say, look at the order and say, this order could be fulfilled by this ERP or could be fulfilled by that ERP. Here are the business logic in place in terms of which ERP we want it to go to, and then we would throw those multiple orders for the same order group out onto the bus and let the ERPs go and pick up all the orders if it applied to them, and so it worked out pretty well.
Are there recommendations that you have for someone when preparing to start a data integration project?
Yeah, the most important thing that gets overlooked a lot of times people want to jump right into the architecture and start, trying to solve the problem. The most important thing is data analysis and making sure you understand your data. There's, especially when you're talking about different systems and you're trying to map this field to that field in that system, you really do need to make sure you understand what's in those fields, what's in that data. It's crazy how inconsistent data can be. You need to determine how clean it is, how accurate it is, how consistent it is in those fields. I'm amazed at, I spent years and years where I would look at addresses, and it's amazing how when you're pulling in data from hundreds of different systems, how dirty it gets. You'd see also things, just realistic situations like 3 miles north of the large elm tree. That ended up being an address on certain customers. And obviously when you're trying to integrate with Avalara or address validation software of some kind, that doesn't work so well. And so making sure you know what's there and how it is. The other thing is we like to talk about was the law of large numbers. We would get in 10 plus million records into this particular database every year. When you look at that, it ends up being a fairly large number, and so there would be things that would happen 0.0001% of the time, and it still would end up happening 100 times, and you're still going to have to figure out how to go handle that. So how much data are you looking at? Maybe it's the 80-20 rule in terms of trying to clean it up, but in reality, a lot of times you've got to figure out how to handle that last 20% in one way or another. Have some rule for everything in a particular place. Even on pre-built integrations. So if you get a system like a BigCommerce system that maybe has pre-built integrations, do your homework. Make sure you understand, that the system integrations are complicated, and it's so easy in marketing information that people put out, and they're not just they're not trying to dupe you or anything, but for brevity and explanation, they're kind of like, hey, we have an integration to NetSuite, and it's like, okay, that sounds great. So then that'll meet our needs, but in reality, you need to talk to the pre-built integration developer and find out what is it really integrating. What are the data types that they're covering? What are the triggers that actually when it sends the data? Are there different things in the APIs that you need to know or consider? Don't assume that because it makes sense to you that the integration pieces are going to be there and work. It may not. It's easy to get kind of lured in by the blanket statement of, hey, we've got an API. Yeah, you can do whatever you need, because sometimes you can dream up things, or you can maybe not even dream, but maybe you've just got things that are kind of standard that you would assume would be there, but aren't. So there's really there's no substitute for a good experience and being able to have experience on that platform, experience with that integration software. Having someone that's done it before, it really helps with the pitfalls of knowing what to ask for and what kind of integrations are there and not there, and good and not good. So yeah, there's a lot of times where you got to do a lot of homework to prepare.
How do you ensure that an integration continues to work over time and not break?
So you're talking about DevOps issues, and there's been times where we set up an integration and it's all good. We walk away, and 6 months later, the customer's calling us and saying, this stopped working about a month ago, and so it ends up being like, are you checking your emails that we set up to make sure that you're getting alerts? So setting up alerts and setting up so to tell people, hey, there's a problem here. Stuff isn't working. Are you checking your log, making sure you have logging? Logging is super important. One of the things that's really hard in DevOps issues is to be able to troubleshoot something that happened, a month ago. And so it's really important to have, good logging, good alerting, knowing and error notifications, making sure that that's all there. In this one particular case, that every so often someone changes the service account password for one reason or another, and so every 6 to 9 months we get a call and they're like, hey, this isn't working, and we're like, did someone change the password again? And so making sure everybody, there's good documentation there for the people that would have access to that. The other thing that we oftentimes see that that can break is when you have integrations, the third party that you've integrated to all of a sudden changes, their file format or their API format or something. So yeah, it can be difficult to stay on top of that, but logging, alerting, and paying attention to the integrations. Don't just set it up and forget about it. Pretty much you can assume that every possible point of failure will probably fail at some point in time over the life of the integrations. So make sure you've kind of got those all covered.
Often we have organizations approach us looking to upgrade or replatform, and they have a legacy ERP system. How does one go about integrating with the legacy ERP system?
The way I like to do it is you've got someone that knows the legacy system, and then you've got someone that knows the new system, the e-commerce system versus the ERP, you'll say. And having expertise on both sides of that integration is really important. And so if it's not easy, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very difficult if the an e-commerce developer comes in and says, oh yeah, we can do that, and they've never had experience in doing that. So you need to kind of have expertise on both sides, have them work together, define good data contracts, and talk about the technology that you're using. Make sure everybody's on board with the data contracts. Make sure everybody's on board with the technology, and have them discuss validation, process assumptions, all the different points that they are going to be working together. Have them work together and have an expert on both sides of that divide.
How do organizations control the cost of those integrations?
Yeah, that's the that's the $1 million question, right? So pun intended. But so you need to know that each data point that you pick, it sounds good in a laundry list, but know that it comes with a cost. Oftentimes, it's people are say, oh yeah, I want I'd like invoices and I'd like invoice payments, and it's like, okay, well, make sure that it's not just a laundry list. What are the things that you really need? Because oftentimes when the data comes in and the more data that you bring in, the more it's going to cost. So limit the number of parties involved in terms of your internal and external. Have the right experts involved. Have expertise on both sides of that divide, like we were talking about a second ago, and build in time for logging, build in time for alerting. Don't just try to do the beta test. Does this work? And make sure you've kind of got that pieces covered. And what I find is, keep it simple. The more moving parts you have, the more places there are for failure. So it's integrations can get very complex very quickly, and taking a step back in your design and saying, are we making this too complex is really critical.
Is it possible to make data integrations perform better?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what you'll find, and unfortunately, what you find sometimes is that you got to try it and see what's happening, and then have to kind of reevaluate performance as you go. And obviously, the earlier you can do that, the better. But if things aren't performing well, there's a series of questions that we usually kind of run through. Is your system running at full capacity? Is it possible you can just add more resources to one end or the other? Is it affecting user experience? If it is, then you need to be separating that data integration away from the UI experience, and break that out. Sometimes you need to make your data sets smaller, and is it are we trying to push giant files through the system, and we're expecting it to be processed in an hour or a few minutes, and we need to make them smaller, or need to make them differential. Let's just do a small piece of the data set. Don't do the whole thing. I had an actual experience of the opposite of that, in that we had pricing data. It ends up being something like, I can't remember what the exact number is, but it was like 1 billion prices that were out there for each combination of customers and products for this particular client. And so with 1 billion and more prices, that can take a while to update. Well, the original requirement was that it doesn't matter how long it takes, I mean it mattered, but it was okay to take a day or two to process through these billion messages, and that wasn't a problem. And then all of a sudden they came to the realization that their price updates actually affect all prices and not just a portion of the prices. Each quarter they did that, and all of a sudden, having it take a day or two to process through 1 billion price changes wasn't a good solution. So we ended up having to actually increase the size of the messages and do them in batches. And so sometimes it's make it smaller, sometimes it's make it bigger. But either way, kind of considering what are the choke points in that performance that's causing an issue.
Can you tell us why a well-built integration would be important to a marketer?
Well, I'm kind of I'm a data geek, and I get that. I'm not a great marketer. I'm really good at data. And what I have found though is that you really have to be an amazing marketer if your site doesn't function well and you still want happy customers. You've got to be amazing. However, you can be an average marketer and have really happy customers if your site functions and is integrated well. All the points talk to each other. All the your orders show up where they're supposed to show up. Things all kind of flow well. So good integrations really make it easier to keep your customer happy and returning. But bad integrations make it hard to market to your customers because you're driving them away. So that's why I really do think marketers should care about good integrations, and it's more about it's less about the It's more about the data and less about the fluff on an integration. And I think it's really important to make sure everything's functioning well.
So Dave, do you have any final notes that you want to add to our educational series here today?
Well, I'm just really excited that you asked me if I'd be interested, and I was like, I don't know that people want to talk about data. How exciting is that? And so I really am glad that I got the chance to kind of talk that through with you. We're as a team, my team is really excited about integrations and being able to make things work and make complex things come together. And so we're excited about that, and it's kind of fun. So I appreciate you giving a data nerd a chance to have a conversation about data today. Thanks, Jared.
Yeah, absolutely. Next time we're going to get Dave to bring his whiteboard. I promise. I'm going to make it happen. He will blow your mind away with his whiteboarding skills. Thank you all for taking the time to connect with us today. If you come up with additional questions around integrations or data specifically, you can reach out to myself. I'd be happy to discuss anything that may have popped up from this conversation today. And we hope to hear from you soon. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Jared.